She was pregnant, and that alone could cost her her life. In the Middle Ages, to carry a child outside of marriage was not seen as a mistake. It was seen as a crime, sin against God, a threat to society, a curse on the land. She might be whipped, drowned, buried alive, or locked away until the baby came and then disappeared. Her name might never be written, her story never told. But tonight, we will tell it. Asterisk, she had no husband, no ring, no dowry, no protection, only a secret growing inside her and the fear of what came next. In medieval villages across England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, an unwed pregnant woman was more than just an object of shame. She was considered dangerous. Priests called her a vessel of lust. Midwives whispered prayers over her belly, and neighbors watched her like a witch, waiting for signs of the devil. Sometimes she had been seduced, sometimes taken by force. But the story never mattered. All that mattered is that she was with child, and not with a man. She might try to hide it, binding her stomach under layers of wool, avoiding eye contact at Mass, praying the winter coats would buy her time, but time always ran out, and the belly always betrayed her. And when it did, the punishments began. First came the whispers, then came the summons, a knock at the door before dawn, a friar with a parchment, and a stone-faced priest. She was told to appear before the ecclesiastical court, not to defend herself, but to confess. The church had many tools. Not all of them were metal. Confession, public penance, excommunication, flogging for an unwed mother. These were not punishments. They were rituals of purification. She might be paraded through the village square, barefoot and wrapped in sackcloth, with ashes on her head and a sign around her neck. Sometimes she would be forced to kneel at the church door for hours, begging forgiveness from villagers as they entered to pray. Other times, she was lashed once for each month of her pregnancy. If she was lucky, that was the end. But luck was rare, especially if the father was unknown. Or worse, noble, because then it was no longer just a sin. It was a threat to the order of things, and when order was threatened, the punishments grew darker. The ones who condemned her were not always priests. Sometimes it was her own family, a father who feared scandal, a mother who worried for dowries, brothers who saw her shame as theirs. They might send her away to a convent, a relative's farm, or a forest cottage hidden from view. Some never returned. Others were handed over directly to the bishop's men, and still more, or simply disowned. It was common in many villages to hold what were called shame feasts, where the family would dress in mourning as if she were already dead, and to the community. Her name scratched from birth ledgers, her seat left empty at the family table, to be pregnant and alone in a world ruled by land. Lineage and purity, it meant exile, not just from the village, but from humanity. And when she sought help from midwives or healers, even they were afraid, because aiding a known fornicator could be seen as a betting sin. So the women who once helped bring life into the world, they began to turn away. Whispers spread that helping such girls brought misfortune, that the devil walked with them, that their children were cursed, and slowly even other women became her jailers. Asterisk, when her time came, there was no cradle, no midwife, no mother holding her hand. There was a cold floor, or a rag for her teeth, and the sound of her own breathing echoing. Off stone walls, some gave birth in sheds, others in abandoned barns, a few in prison cells. The pain did not care where she was, nor did the blood. There were no warm towels, no whispered comforts, and often no one came. If she lived through the night, it was a miracle. If the baby did too, it was a complication. Because now she was not just a sinner. She was a mother of a bastard. And that child, no matter how innocent, bore the stain of illegitimacy. In the eyes of the church, it had no father. And in the eyes of the law, it had no name. Many such babies were taken, given away to foundling homes, or left on monastery steps in the dead of night. Others were quietly buried, some by grief, others by force, because what was forbidden to live was often allowed to die. Asterisk, even if she lived. She did not return. Not truly. A woman who bore a child outside of marriage carried a mark not visible, but no less real. Villagers would cross. Themselves, when she passed, children were told to avoid her. Employers refused her bread for labor. Some managed to survive by begging. Others became servants or worse. A few were taken in by nuns, but only under strict silence and long penance. And many simply vanished into the woods, into the rivers, into the ground, because to be seen as impure was not just shameful. It was unlivable. Even the child, if it survived, grew up with the weight of the mother's past. Bastards were often barred from inheritance, banned from priesthood, refused guild apprenticeships. They were born already punished, and the mothers. They became ghosts in their own lifetime, whispered about, feared forgotten, until eventually even their sins were buried under the silence they were forced to live in. Asterisk silence was not just survival, it was punishment too. Remain quiet was to obey. To confess even in whispers was to risk ruin, so generation after generation. Women taught their daughters how to disappear, how to speak less, walk quickly, to avoid notice. Because what had happened to one woman could happen to any. And in many places it did. Stories of buried births, of screaming girls locked in granaries, of infants found in rivers. These were not myths. They were warnings. The midwives who once helped began to fear accusation. Those who cared became suspects. It was safer not to ask, not to knock on that door, not to wonder where she went. Communities became complicit by omission. Villages built on stone, and faith began to rot from within, held together by secrets and shame. Even the church, for all its rituals, had no balm for this wound. And so silence grew like moss over the memory of these women until their pain became part of the walls, part of the land, part of the history we were never meant to hear. Asterisk, but this was not just a cultural tragedy. It was a system, one that profited in land and labor, and loyalty from fear. The church expanded its power by controlling sex and salvation. By placing the female body under divine jurisdiction, kings and lords used shame to regulate inheritance, lineage, and alliances. A bastard could fracture dynasties, so unwed mothers became threats to the state. Even local councils, from Italy to the British Isles, imposed laws, fines for fornication, taxes on illegitimate births, and rewards for those who reported women hiding their pregnancies. Informants were everywhere, and the women, they were currency, sometimes used in marriages of reparation, sometimes forced into servitude to repay their sin, sometimes given to monasteries where their labor served penance and economy. These weren't just moral consequences, they were transactional. A society built on shame had learned how to make it profitable, and beneath it all, the women bled, silently, invisibly, until even history lost track of their pain. Asterisk, but in the shadows of shame. Some voices rose, softly, secretly. There were midwives who refused to report. Women who opened their doors, priests who turned away, pretending not to see, and there were girls silent for years who finally spoke. In some places, small movements began, petitions to spare a servant girl, local councils pressured to lessen punishments. Communities, where fathers were named and made to marry or pay, it wasn't justice. But it was resistance, a quiet war against the silence, and in stories passed from mother to daughter not written, but remembered, the truth survived. One tale from 14th century Flanders speaks of a pregnant girl hidden beneath floorboards for 6 months, fed by her sister, till the baby was born and smuggled away in another, from Yorkshire. A group of widows formed a kind of secret shelter, rotating homes, guarding the shame of others like sacred relics. We cannot verify them all, but we can listen, because history does not always survive in parchment. Sometimes it survives in whispers, in lullabies, in names never written, but remembered. Asterisk, because forgetting is too easy in silence. Once useful for survival becomes a weapon when it lingers too long. To remember these women, the unnamed, the erased, the condemned, is not to judge the past. It is to speak into the void where they once screamed. We do not know their names, may never find their graves, but their suffering shaped the world. The fear they felt, passed down, the laws they lived under, inherited, the shame they were forced to carry. Buried in the language of virtue, it echoes even now in modern laws policing women's bodies, in whispers behind closed doors, in how we speak and don't. Speak about single mothers, about autonomy, about blame. Their stories matter not because they were rare, but because they were everywhere and still are. We do not resurrect them to pity them. We resurrect them to remind ourselves that silence is not neutral, that history chooses sides, and that to name the forgotten is to give them a place in the world again. Even if it's only here, it's only now, only in a voice late at night, whispering their pain into the dark. Picture her one last time, alone, cold, hidden in the dark corner of a stone room. The walls are thick, but the silence thicker, her hands trembling over her belly, life growing inside her while death waits outside. She is not a name in a book. She is not a saint or a queen. She is one of thousands, forgotten not by chance, but by design. And yet, here she is. You hear her breathing. You feel her fear. You know now what was done to her. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to change how we remember, because memory is not history. It is a choice, a light we choose to shine or to withhold. So let us shine it on her, on all of them. Let this hour be a monument, not of stone or glory, but of witness. We have no grave to tend, no body to return. But in this story, we return something far more valuable, a voice, a place, a name, not hers, so that no girl in any century again grows up thinking her silence is the price of survival, and no woman is ever again buried in history. For daring to carry life, *Uv. Been listening to The Forgotten Flesh. If this story moved you, consider sharing it. Consider remembering her. And consider who else history has chosen to forget.